Hey everyone, my name is Nathan Merkel, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of Sports Stories, the podcast. This is a sports-centered podcast that will discuss different stories that we as humans have experienced with sports, through sports, and in sports. And I'm really hoping to provide really cool contextual experiences on how we sort of go through life and how sports affect that, how sports helps us. Does sport hurt us? What makes sports so special in our lives? And how does playing sports impact us? How does following a sport team impact us? I'm going to dive headfirst into a lot of these questions through critical conversations with a large variety of guests on the show. And with my current background in research and academia, I'm hoping to bridge that gap between practicality and research topics. And if you really enjoy the show, I really ask that you support the show through the Buy Me a Coffee website link that's on the bottom of this episode link, or on the Buzzsprout website. There's a support link where you can help me support the podcast. I'm really hoping to transition to video content in the future, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you very much. All right, everybody. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Sports Stories, the podcast. This episode is going to actually take a little bit of a different turn. Instead of hosting a guest on the show today, I'm actually going to be sharing my story through sport and where I've gone through and how I've learned some of the things I've learned and where I've worked, where I want to work, why I'm researching the things I'm researching. And then also I want to talk about some couple of current examples that have really started to affect me and really relate to the things that I'm looking at. And those current events are the Kansas City Chiefs threatening relocation to move out of Kansas City, and then the Chicago Bears also attempting to relocate. And so I'll go into a little bit of a detail onto both of those. So, and just sort of my opinion and take on them, how I think it'll sort of shift the way that we view sports and the way that the city is going to consume sports in the future, and how it has actually changed how I view sports too after the Rams relocated on me. So to begin, I guess I'll just start off with how I grew up and where I started to get interested in sports. Man, I'm originally from St. Louis, and I grew up playing sports all throughout my life, and I really only knew sports, and I really didn't pay attention to school at all. I was not interested in academia. I was not interested in school. I played a lot of video games and things like that. I played this video game called RuneScape a lot. Those that know me, that are close to me, know that I was very addicted to playing RuneScape. But that's basically what my life looked like for about 18 years is sports and video games. Really didn't have that large of a social life. And I focused all of my energy on sports. And I ended up pursuing a soccer scholarship to play at the University of Ottawa in Kansas, Ottawa University. It's an NAIA school. And I really enjoyed my first year playing collegiately at Ottawa. Unfortunately, I started to get some concussions and got some other injuries that really hindered my experience at Ottawa. And as a 18, 19-year-old kid with multiple concussions, I think I got like 3 or 4 concussions in the spring semester, which actually really has, now I'm realizing, has really affected my recollection. I've kind of struggle to recall things, but I've good memory, but recollection has actually been affected from those concussions. So it's a bit unfortunate, but I'm grateful that I transferred when I did. And I actually transferred to the University of Central Missouri, where I started to get involved in sports, and I started refereeing intramurals. I started reffing like flag football and basketball and all these different sports, and I really enjoyed my time there. And I kind of like worked up the ranks through my time at Central Missouri, and started to show really a lot of interest in organizing intramural sports and sort of scheduling games and teams and leagues and sort of the behind the scenes aspects of running the department. And so after I graduated in 2018 from Central Missouri in Warrensburg. I went and actually got a job at the city of Memphis with their Parks and Rec department as an athletic specialist. And so my job at the city of Memphis was basically the same thing that I did at Central Missouri, but for a government instead of for a university. I helped hire and train and evaluate officials for the city and their parks and rec leagues. I helped program specific sports. I helped plan large scale tournaments. Like they have a really large, I'm pretty sure it was like 100 teams, I think, basketball tournament. And we all actually, this was in 2019, right before COVID. We did that massive 100 team tournament by hand. And so, for those that are familiar with creating tournament brackets and how that works, like imagine a 100 team bracket that we had to design by hand. And so it's actually a very funny story. I actually forgot to include one team in our bracket, one for one of the seasons, and we had to restart the entire tournament because I accidentally forgot to put the one team into this 100 team bracket playoff system. So that I learned from my mistake on that one. But that was a really interesting experience to understand how sort of government funded programs run sports through cities and community centers. And what's really unique about the city of Memphis is that the city of Memphis provides all of their youth athletic programming for free, which in hindsight is a phenomenal opportunity for families to provide sports for their kids and for us as the athletic specialists and the programmers of sports itself to give families opportunities to play. But excuse me, one of the downsides that I actually found out and realized about this problem is that when you offer free things to people sort of take advantage of it and they don't really take it seriously. And so that was one of the things that really stood out to me. And I actually asked I think it was a family. It was either a mom or a dad. It was a family member or a family group or something of that nature. And I asked him and I was like, how do you guys approach the free programming? Like, do you like the free programming? Is it beneficial? Is it good? What's the sort of vibe with it? And it was really interesting what he said. He shared that like while in turn it is great, the free programming is awesome, but at the end of the day, he literally said we don't have a skin in the game, so there really isn't a lot of passion towards it. And so this is something that I really started to realize is like with free programming like that, a lot of participants, a lot of athletes don't necessarily take it seriously because it is free. And we would have a lot of people show up late. We'd have a lot of people that just wouldn't show up at all, solely because it's a free league and it's a free service. And so people don't really feel obligated because what this individual said in Memphis, that they don't have skin in the game to want to show up, just because it's free and it's always going to be there and it's always going to be free. So again, it's a wonderful opportunity, but it's one of those aspects of like free things that we sort of take advantage of. That was really a life lesson for me too, is to sort of understand how we as humans perceive things that are just given to us. And it was really interesting to think about that. And through the years I was working at Memphis, I worked there for a couple of years, and I started to realize I don't know, the job, I wanted a bit more hands-on experience. There was a lot of behind the scenes programming, and doing like I said, a 100 team bracket by hand. That's a lot of off of the field, sort of in the office behind a computer programming. And I wanted to be a bit more face forward, front facing sort of environment. And it was at that time where I was still speaking with my previous boss at the University of Central Missouri. Shout out to Kevin Sneed if you're listening to this, but I was talking to him about that feeling and that experience, and I was like, yeah, I mean, it's a great job, but it's just it's not exactly what I thought it was going to be. And I mean, I think everybody's first job really isn't exactly what you thought it was going to be. And he gratefully was like, "Well, I've got an opening for a graduate assistant at Central Missouri," and so I kind of said, "Screw it, why not?" And I left Memphis to go back to school for my master's degree in sport management at the University of Central Missouri, and so was basically doing the same thing I did during my undergraduate degree. But at this part, I was the actual graduate assistant on paper, helping to run and plan the intramural department. And so I was getting a 20-hour graduate assistant stipend to work 20 hours a week to run the intramural department while also getting a tuition waiver to pursue my master's degree. So for those out there that are on the fence or thinking about school or trying to find ways to afford school, if you have the means for it, finding a graduate assistantship I highly recommend it. Usually you get a tuition waiver, like they pay for your school, and then you also get a monthly stipend. So you're basically getting paid to go to school. So I would highly recommend looking at any form of graduate assistantship. And so after my time at Central Missouri, I pursued a master's in sport management. I did the online program there and I graduated through COVID. It was a really weird experience to do intramurals through COVID. We tried to enforce people wearing masks, but as we all know, when we experienced COVID, like it turned into those like face diapers, and it just didn't really work to enforce a basketball league where people wore those things. And so we had to get really creative with some of the sports we did, but it ended up working out really well. And so after I graduated, I ended up moving to Colorado, where I lived for about 6 or 7 months. And I worked at Lululemon. I ended up being a key leader there as like a managerial role for about 6 to 7 months. I lived out there with a friend of mine, and I was sort of like slowly pursuing a full-time career, but I wanted to just take my time and relax. Is where I snowboarded a lot in Colorado, which is a ton of fun. And I slowly found and applied for jobs, and I found a job in Seattle with a company called Pedalheads. So Pedalheads is a private company that runs sports camps for kids up in the Northwest region of the U.S. and also a lot of different regions. They're starting to break out into different regions in the U.S. too, in North America, but heavily located in the Northwest. And so I was a assistant regional manager for Pedalheads, where I would basically program. It's basically the same thing I did for intramurals and for Memphis, but now for a private company. And so I programmed camps in different locations and hired staff and trained them and programmed the activities and planned and all this sort of stuff. And so through that job as well, I really enjoyed my time, but moving to a brand new city again was really isolating. And I weirdly sort of found myself like, I'm sure those listening, like when you're out there doing your job or you're out doing whatever it is that you find passionate, you have like 1 to 2 minutes of free time, and maybe you pull out your phone and you scroll through social media or something like that to just pass by like an extra 60 seconds of the day. And when this time hit me, when I was working in Seattle, I would keep searching PhD programs for some reason. And like if you remember the story I shared when I was younger, I was a terrible student. I was not good. I did not care about school or academics. I graduated Central Missouri, my undergrad, with I think a 2.8 or a 2.9 GPA, which is, on average a C plus. So I really didn't put forth any effort into it. But as I got older and I matured, I started to switch my passion from playing and competing in sports to learning about sports and researching it and learning about the management side of it and how people can manage organizations the right way to better serve people that consume them. And so that's sort of what sport management is as a whole. And I got really intrigued about a PhD. And, I was calling my mom and dad, figuring out, is this really what I want to do? And we sort of made the collective decision, like, yeah, screw it, why not? And I ended up applying to Illinois and I got accepted, and here I am. So it's kind of wild, the trajectory that I've been on. And I've lived in about seven to eight states so far, and I'm currently 30. So I've moved around to chase a dream, and I'm sure those out there that are doing the same, like, in time, that dream will conceptualize. You just have to be patient, and the gates will open for you metaphorically, and you'll start to see a very clear path after that. And so, currently where I'm at right now, I'm a second year PhD student studying sport management at the University of Illinois, and I'm in terms of like research and what I'm really interested in. It stems a lot from the very first episode that I posted was with my father. I called it franchise betrayal. Looking at how the Rams left St. Louis and how my dad and I have gone through this sort of like psychological betrayal stage of our lives. And ever since that relocation, we've sort of been disconnected, emotionally disconnected from sports. And we talked a lot about that. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, please go check out that very first episode. And I hope you really enjoy that. But that sort of is the fuel to my research. I'm really interested in how do people become loyal to teams? So how do fans become loyal? What is that sort of roadmap? What does that look like? What are you influenced by? So maybe like recently, a lot of women have become fans of the Chiefs because of Taylor Swift and her engagement with Travis Kelce. And so, but what does, in terms of like psychology, what is going through a person's brain to understand why you're loyal to a team like that? Like, are you just loyal to the person? Are you loyal to the brand? Are you loyal to the team? Are you loyal to the community itself? Those are different levels of loyalty in the way that we look at it, and that sort of symbolic relationship. So I'm really interested in that sort of conceptualization or that roadmap of how one person becomes loyal. And then also a very big part of my interest of research is what happens when that loyalty, when this sort of love that we have for a team or a sport or a brand, what happens when it gets tested? What happens when we feel betrayed by this very thing that we love? And there's this sort of like negative emotion that we feel. And that is sort of like a psychological disconnection. And that is something that I'm very interested in as well. And so hopefully through my research, I can start to uncover themes and help organizations better understand what their fans feel, what they're loyal to and why. And then if an organization has like an internal problem or internal issues with maybe a trade just went down, like for example, the Dallas Mavericks who just traded Luka away within the past year or two. I know a lot of their fans are like feeling this sort of betrayal. They don't really know should they continue to follow the Mavs because this very person they loved is gone. The brand and the identity of the Mavs has been sort of shifted a bit, and they're trying to realize like, wow, do I still love them? I don't know. Yeah, I think I do. I don't know. And there's this kind of like 50-50 that's going on in your mind. So this is where I'd love to come in with my research and provide marketing strategies or branding strategies for organizations to better understand their fans and better connect with fans that are in this sort of environment. And so hopefully through time, that is something that I'm able to accomplish. And so that's sort of my life story and where I'm currently at right now. And I'd love to shift the attention and the focus of this episode to some current examples that really speak to me. Unfortunately, that really speak to me. And this will be very anecdotal and opinion based. I have a couple of empirical sort of data-based evidence and valuations and things like that. So, but most of it will just be my personal opinion on things. So I'd love to transition to two really interesting things that are currently happening in the NFL, and it's not new because this has been happening for a very long time. Again, I shared how the Rams left in 2015. And now the Chiefs are basically threatening relocation, and the Chicago Bears are also threatening relocation. And so I really wanted to start this segment with a factual valuation of how the Rams shifted their valuation from moving from St. Louis to LA. So in 2015, before the Rams left in St. Louis, the Rams were valued at $1.45 billion. And immediately after they moved from St. Louis to LA, their valuation basically doubled. And in 2016, their valuation went immediately to $2.9 billion dollars. And so that is a drastic increase. And now currently their valuation sits like insanely. It's basically fivefold. And so currently, according to Google, right now, as of late 2025, the Los Angeles Rams are valued at $10 billion. So as you can see, I don't really think any other sport franchise could have quadrupled or like quintupled their valuation just from moving from one city to another. Like that is basically wild and how that has happened. And what's really interesting is we look at the Cardinals, like the St. Louis Cardinals, who are in that same market, who have won I think 10 World Series at this point. Like crazy historical relevance, very historical team, very loved team, but their valuation in the St. Louis market is 2.5 billion. And so as we can see, even the most like beloved teams, most popular teams in St. Louis still sits at 2.5. And immediately when the Rams left, they doubled it and are now at 10.5 billion. I'm pretty sure they surpassed the Cowboys as like the most highly valued, most expensive franchise in North America. So really interesting to sort of think about these things and like really understand where these relocation things are coming from. And so initially I wanted to give a little bit of like a history lesson on relocation. This will be short. But initially relocation actually really started in the early 20th century. So this was think of back when like sport was becoming really popular, like at the polo grounds and in North America with baseball and all these sort of things like that. And it really started to kick off in the baseball scene because baseball scenes and stadiums used to be built with wooden stands. And so unfortunately, a lot of those teams lost stadiums because of fires because there were wooden and people would smoke and thunderstorms would happen and like all these things. So like the stands would burn down. And then also in the 20s, the Great Depression hit. So teams had to move in order to survive. Like this was a very survival based instinct. It wasn't really done to make money like you see through the Rams and like you see with these two other examples with Kansas City and Chicago. But early on, it was done as a means to survive. And what really transitioned is the Industrial Revolution in the US. So we see now towards the late of the 20th century where the largest relocation that occurred was the Brooklyn Dodgers from New York transitioning straight to LA in order to drive revenue. And that was like the opening of the floodgates in a sense for using public infrastructure to build stadiums. And so this was where things started with the Industrial Revolution, where people were like, wow, we can start to build these really cool buildings, these cool stadiums. And owners were starting to get smart and savvy and start to realize that, wow, I don't have to put up any money. I can just leverage the public and have them pay for me through public stipends and tax increases and things like that. And so this is where this sort of money side, like private ownership, started to flourish in this capitalistic country. So, and then now, currently from the 80s on, we're in this stage right now of threat, and this is where we see basically everything recently in the last 30 to 40 years of every relocation scandal or thought or process that has happened within the last 30, 40 years all stems from some form of threat, usually from the owner. They usually threat to relocate if the public will provide money. And if the public doesn't provide money, then the owner will threaten and be like, well, if you don't give me any money, I'm going to move the team. And this is basically what happened with Stan Kroenke and the Rams. Is he wanted more money from the Rams and from not the Rams, from the city of St. Louis, but the city wasn't going to give him the money that he wanted. And so he was like, okay, screw you. I'm going to leave. And he just bought his own land and just moved his team and is now like basically the richest dude in sports history. So it's pretty crazy. And like, there's a book called Field of Schemes by two authors named Mouse and Kagan in 2008, and they talk about this thing called the franchise free agency, which is where this like from the 90s early on, like 9 NFL teams threatened or rumored to relocate just in the 90s, and so like it's this crazy where we're at right now in terms of the NFL, this really wild like free agency in terms of privately owned organizations, and they just are like, screw you, I'm going to threaten to relocate and leave, and if you don't give me what I want, then I'm moving. See ya. And that's basically what's been happening, and it's really crazy and it's very damaging. Um, and that sort of transitions us into the Kansas City example of where they're currently at right now. And for those that are not familiar, Kansas City shares a parking lot with the Royals. So the Chiefs and the Royals share a parking lot. And one of the really, really cool things about the Chiefs and the Royals is this parking lot. And for those that are in Kansas City or fans of the Chiefs and have been to games, the one of the biggest draws, I would argue, one of the largest draws to go to Chiefs games or to just be a Chiefs fan is that parking lot. Is this shared parking lot, and it's this tailgating. If you for those out there who haven't been to a Chiefs game, if you go to a Chiefs game, people are out there tailgating like from the day before all the way to the day of the game. Like it's a crazy environment. It's really cool, and it creates this sort of community atmosphere from everybody in this same parking lot, tailgating, preparing for the game, and that sort of stuff. And but as greedy as people are in human nature, like the owners of the Hunt family, they want their own compound. Basically, they want basically what Stan did with the Rams and SoFi Stadium is having this crazy large scale stadium to have all these things and put sort of Chiefs back on this massive map of having this really cool grandiose stadium. And according to Newsweek, I've got an article pulled up here where it's saying that the Chiefs are actually attending a meeting in Topeka. So those that don't know the geography, so Kansas City is currently housed in Missouri. It's one of those weird cities where it's actually divided in half. Half the city is in Kansas and half the city is in Missouri. And so the Chiefs are currently on the Missouri side. They're in the Missouri side. But what the owners are doing is they're meeting with people in Topeka. And so Topeka is actually like, I don't know the actual distance, but it's probably like 30 miles west of Kansas City. In the sort of innards of Kansas. And so it would move the Chiefs from the city of Kansas City and place them into Topeka. Now, I don't know how much this is, I don't think this is actually going to happen because that would be very, very disastrous in my mind and do the same thing it did for us, but in St. Louis. And so I'm really hoping that owners don't try to like levy the public so heavily, and they try to just listen to the public and maybe just try to renovate the stadium as is and try to maintain the historical value. Because I think what's really cool is like you look at these historical stadiums in the US, like we're sort of dwindling. Like I know in the NFL there's the Packers stadium at Lambeau Field. Like that's iconic. That is such an iconic stadium that I feel like a war would break out if you think of trying to tear down Lambeau Field and even try to rebuild it. And same with like baseball stadiums like the Red Sox and the Cubs. Like there's no way we would ever try to tear down those stadiums and move them and rebuild it, like because of the historical significance. But in order to get to that point of historical significance, you have to keep the stadium in the same city. And so all of these relocations and all of these things, like it threatens the history of sports stadiums, and it creates this sort of divide. And there's really not a lot of historical significance. And when you keep just bouncing from city to city, it's very, it just hurts. It hurts the fans, it hurts the community a lot. And that's actually something I'm trying to prove with my research. So, hopefully those in Kansas City don't lose their beloved Chiefs and they stay in Kansas City. But as we know from example and through history, that owners are greedy, and if they move their team, they'll probably make more money in a different market. So everything's ran monetarily, not psychologically or sociologically. So I'm really hoping that the Chiefs find an answer that will sort of answer some of these problems. But and that moves me into the Bears and talking about the Chicago Bears and their problem right now. They're threatening to relocate too. The owners came out with an open letter to the Bears. It says, "Dear Chicago Bears fans, on Monday night of our home opener, the passion in every corner was palpable and powerful. Today, 100 days later, that feeling is even stronger." And so what's really interesting is the owners are really trying to get you to feel this like, yeah, like that we know that you love us is what he's basically trying to say. Is they're saying we know you love us, we know you love the Bears, and it's almost like a we know you love us no matter where we're at sort of thing. And I feel like that's what they're trying to hit at here is like I feel like it's like one of those things where no matter where we're located or where we're thinking about going, we know that you'll love the Bears no matter the location. And so it's sort of really interesting, and like they're really trying to do what Stan Kroenke did, is to build this sort of world-class stadium. They want to do a domed stadium, which I get being in Chicago like that. And so it's really interesting what they're proposing here is they're saying the stakes for Illinois is significant, is they'll open thousands of union jobs, year-round attractions, and global events made possible by a fixed roof that would provide long-term revenue for this state. And so what's really interesting here is I've got this website pulled up of stadium.chicagobears.com, and the thing about like stadiums is they're so cyclical, and in order for it to make sense, like for example, the Olympics, when it went to Brazil, it bankrupted the country because they built all of these state-of-the-art stadiums, but there weren't a sufficient number of events or any sort of games or sports to sort of uphold the cost of those buildings. And so it actually bankrupted the entire country because they put so much money into it, but they lost all of it. And so this is one of those things where like just because you build a brand new stadium, it doesn't mean it's going to impact, have all these things. And so I think that's one of those like misconceptions about building a brand new stadium is like you think it's going to just, if you just build a new stadium, you're just going to bring in millions and millions of dollars. Like it says here they're proposing $10.9 billion in economic impact during construction. And so I'm not sure where that's going. It says 11 billion during while you're building. So like for those that are in construction or understand construction, the friend I lived with in Colorado was in construction and still is. And he talks about how it's such a fluctuating like project. Like no project is ever linear. Even if you have a budget for this, say their budget is 1 billion, they'll probably exceed it like drastically because just as where we're at right now with the current ecosystem in shipping and foreign goods and things like that, like if you're trying to build this mega stadium, you've got lots of metals coming in and lots of cement, all this sort of stuff, and shipping in all of these materials, like prices fluctuate. Things happen, maybe you start building and something in the dirt doesn't fit the same way that you thought it would. And so you have to adapt, and that creates more money. And like, it's never really reliable, and it's going to cost more than people think. And what's really interesting is like their website is saying 9,000 permanent statewide jobs after completion, like permanent jobs. And I'm not really sure where this number comes from, to be quite honest with you. And so when you think of a stadium, like the Chicago Bears, there's probably not going to be a ton of full-time staff working in the stadium itself. And they're probably going to move from where they're currently at to their new stadium. So it's not really creating permanent like full-time jobs. They're just relocating from one city to another. And so I'm not too sure where the permanent comes from. Maybe that's like building restaurants, but in order to build those restaurants, you have to tear down what's currently around them. And I know that they're proposing to move to Arlington Heights, which is a suburb of Chicago. It's like the northwest suburb of Chicago. And apparently, like, they're trying to tear down a bunch of things in order to make way for it. And it's almost like gentrification of the area, and, which is basically what every other stadium tries to do. And I don't know if any of y'all have been to Arizona, the Cardinals Stadium. I just went to Phoenix a while ago. It's a very awesome complex, but there's a stadium, and then directly around it is a parking lot, and then directly around that parking lot is this like entertainment district. And I would bet that a lot of that money funnels back into the stadium, and so that's a lot of the things that these owners are trying to do is they're trying to privatize owning the stadium, owning the parking lot, and then owning the entertainment district that surrounds it. And so that all the money comes in, goes straight to the owner. And what's interesting is like, even if you have public funds and public services and things like that helping you fund these projects, that means that when the team makes money, the owner has to siphon some of that revenue back to the public, and it's shared. It's a shared revenue. It doesn't go straight to the owner. And so that is why Stan Kroenke footed the entire bill, and he paid for the whole thing for the SoFi Stadium in LA, so that every single dollar goes from attendance, parking, whatever, straight to Stan Kroenke, and he doesn't have to go anywhere else with it. And so what's really interesting is thinking about this sort of creation of jobs, and like, sure, maybe it'll create part-time jobs because events are cyclical and seasons are cyclical. The NFL only happens, you only have like eight. I'm not very privy to the NFL now, so maybe what, 8 or 9, depending if they go to the playoffs. But okay, on average, 8 to 10 home games throughout the year. And so you've got another 10 months of programming that you need to fill. And so where does that come from? Like, what are you programming in those stadiums to sort of pay for all these things? And like 9,000 jobs created. I don't really see 9,000 I'm not too sure where 9,000 comes from. Is that all the restaurants that are going to be built, or like, that'll be constructed? In order to construct them, you have to tear everything else down to build it. And so it's sort of one of those catch-22s, like, yeah, sure, they are creating 9,000 jobs. In order to create those jobs, you had to tear down multiple neighborhoods and forcibly relocate people. And sometimes eminent domain can come into handy, or come into talks where like the government or will come in, and if it's public land, they can come in and seize property and pay you out and buy your house or buy your property out under you in order to make room for something else. And so like that could also be eminent domain. And there's just a lot of questions around this sort of thing. And it's also really interesting is to think about like the current valuation of the Bears. And so I'm looking at Statista right now. It's an online like statistics platform. It's really cool. And so from COVID in 2020, they were valued at $3.5 billion. And currently right now in 2025, they're valued at $8.2 billion. And so what's really interesting is I've read that they're thinking about relocating the Bears from Soldier Field in Chicago to Northwest Indiana. So then they would be the Indiana Bears, or I don't know if it would be one of those like New York Jets, New York Giants things where I'm pretty sure they're actually in New Jersey, right? And so like maybe they would claim Chicago Bears, but they're actually housed in Indiana, which would be a little weird. And I've like, if you lived in Indiana, you'd be like, well, what the heck? You're just using our land and our state to, capitalize off of all that stuff. Is just kind of funny. Then looking at like the cap of Indiana, the Indiana Pacers, they're valued at 4.2 billion. And so if the Bears come in, that would bring a lot to the state of Indiana, but then they would take a lot away from the state of Illinois. And so it's really interesting to think about some of these things and where teams go and why they're trying to move and why things are trying to solidify to new cities. And at the end of the day, like the owner in Kevin Warren's what is this called? It's the open letter from president and CEO regarding the Bears Stadium project. They said that their goal is clear. They want to build a world-class football team that has a world-class stadium worthy of our world-class fans, a stadium that reflects the future we are building together. And so, again, I really think that this is one of those things like the owners and the leadership group are coming out and saying, hey, we know you love us. We know that you love us. But we want more. And we want a better stadium. We want more money, more revenue generation opportunities, and things like that. Like Soldier Field is an iconic stadium. It was built a long time ago and has historical roots. And the fact that they're trying to move that and get away from that is very concerning. And I think it hits at a lot of like culture problems in the US that like we don't really take care of our historical monuments because we just tear them down and build new ones. And so like, we're really quick to tear down sports stadiums and these sort of like arenas and rebuild new ones. And it sort of creates this weird divide in my mind. And so it's really interesting why the Bears are trying to move. And I think at the end of the day, their main goal is what I shared earlier, is this new sort of like category that we're in, talking about franchise relocation and why they're doing it. And it's a threat is basically what it is the owners are threatening the public. They're being like, hey, we want a better stadium. We want a larger stadium for our world-class team, for this world-class stadium. We want to hype the fans up to believe that it's this world-class thing. But at the end of the day, like it's already world-class. Like it's already an elite stadium with an elite team. So why not, in my mind, why not just renovate and maintain the historical significance of the stadium instead of tear it down and rebuild a new one? And that sort of ends my soapbox episode on relocation. I really hope everybody enjoyed my rant. I hope those out there enjoyed this sort of like personal look into who I am and how I've been interviewing and where my passions come from and where my interests come from. And so I'm really hoping to start to deliver some video content to everybody in the coming year. So thank you everybody so much for listening to this episode, and I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you again.